Hello YouTubers, Tobito here with Rocky Mountain Snow MX, 720-263-7533. So we are on reassembly of reinstalling a track back into a customer's unit. So I wanted to shoot a quick little video to give you some tips and tricks on reinstalling a Yeti track. First thing that you want to do is make sure that the directional arrow that is printed on the track right here is going in the proper direction of track movement. Don't install these babies backwards. This is a 2019 129 Super Sport, but this is very similar all the way from 17 through 2021, but a little bit different on 20 and 21 brakes. So this is really focusing kind of on the 2018, 2019, they're almost identical. So first thing that we're going to do is assemble our PIMS assembly that goes on the brake. This is what is used to keep the snow and ice off of the brake rotor. Very simple design, but works great. It has the capture nuts back here, and then of course has the guards on it. When you assemble these, you literally just push the PIMS up through the plastic brake guard using the holes that are already there. Just like so. Some people like to put these onto the rotor prior to installation. Some like to put them on the rotor after installation. Just depends on how much room you gave yourself to work with the track and everything. If it's on the drive shaft prior to installation, it can be a little bit more difficult to get the rotor and everything up into place. So as you're pressing these together, you want to make sure that these two ridges fit together properly before you bend the tabs. Once you got them in, you literally just take the tabs, bend them over so that they kind of lock this piece into place. Now you're ready for installation. Here is our new 20, call it 20 and a half brake rotor upgrade, already all installed on this unit. Drive shaft, of course, sits into here like so. PIMS assembly goes out on a 129 SS. Don't forget to install this spacer once you put the rotor on. So I like putting the brake guard and PIMS assembly on out here because I can see it really well. It's super tight to get over the rotor, so you don't, and it's somewhat of a fragile piece, so you don't want to just get underneath there and muscle it around and cause yourself problems. The other thing that you want to do is you want to inspect to make sure that the PIMS assembly and rotor guard went onto the internal seal now in a correct manner. So that internal seal on, sorry, I was looking for this, on the new 2019 brakes, that seal should go on the inside of the plastic housing. So as we're looking at this, here's your plastic housing, and there's our seal completely on the inside. So don't let that seal get on the outside, or you're not going to seal the brake from ice and all that as well as you should. All right, so now we're just simply going to slide our track up in because we do have it in the right place. We've got it going in the right direction. Once track's into place, we're going to get the drive shaft ready to install. Just like on all of the bearings, the bearing replacement videos that I did, little bit of grease on the surfaces where the bearings go, because we don't want that inside race of the bearing to rust to this titanium shaft. It's not a big deal if it is, but it is a big deal when you're trying to get it back apart. So it just makes disassembly more friendly when you've greased the internal bearing shafts. So now that we've got our drive shaft all together ready to go in, simply just lift the track. Make sure your brake line's out of the way. Put your drive shaft through the belt side. Bring it back up into the bearing side. Do not forget to put this piece on right now. If you forgot to put this piece on and you tried to get it on after the fact, you will actually bend these tabs and life will not be good. So right now, get that piece in there so you don't forget it. We have already replaced the bearings on both sides, so they're good to go. We're going to blue Loctite all the bolts that go in this side that hold both the bearing retainer in place and the brake caliper. Okay, we are ready for install. So you kind of want to rotate your PIMS assembly around so that the bolts are relatively close to the right spots of the backing plate. Just makes installation of the bolts a little easier. Here we go. Backing plate's in place. We're kind of holding pins in the right place of the drive shaft, and we're going to align our drive shaft with the bearing. Grab our Yeti bearing press tool. We're going to pull this bearing onto the drive shaft, starting with the bearing drive side first. This tool is somewhat on the short side, so make sure you have proper engagement of the tool prior to really pulling the bearing on. So what I do is I drive the bolt into the drive shaft, pulling the bearing at the same time to start out with. Once I have half an inch or so engagement, then I'll actually use the nut and just spin the nut to get the bearing to pull on. You'll feel it all stop moving and the bearing be pressed on. Then you can remove your Yeti bearing press tool. Check to make sure that the drive shaft is now pulled almost all the way to the edge of the bearing. That's how you know it's fully seated, because there should be just a small recess between the inner bearing and the end of the drive shaft, so that the nut and so that the washer bolt holds tension on that. Once you've got it seated, you can go ahead and install the bearing retainer bolts. You want to make sure that your PIMS assembly on the inside is lined up correctly to accept those bolts as they come through. Don't try to muscle these bolts through, because they'll grab the carbon and work their way through, and once they hit that PIMS assembly, if it's not aligned correctly, they will bend and distort the PIMS assembly. So what I'm doing here is I'm watching the bolt go through, make sure that the bolt goes into the PIMS assembly and starts to tighten up. There we go, we're in the PIMS. I got one bolt alignment, so now I'm going to work on the second. Once I have two, life is good, we can pre-torque. So a little trick to putting the brake caliper on, I like to take a screwdriver. I have a certain size that I always use. I insert it between the pads. Once I've got it inserted between the pads, that is just perfect. Keeps the pads separated, the width of the rotor maybe a little bit more. I take the bleed rubber off because that's really easy to do right now. A little harder once it's in the kit. Then all I do is I put the brake rotor on. Put the caliper on the brake rotor. As I push it into place, it will actually push my screwdriver out, and it'll release the pads. I then align the caliper with the bearing retainer and pins assembly. Free torque. My bolts into place. Super simple. All right, I'm gonna take you over to the other side. We're gonna do the belt side installation of bearings and stuff. All right, so we have already replaced the bearing in this. It's ready to reinstall for the customer. I have lubricated the shaft with a little grease. I'm going to also grease up the ID of this bearing so that it has a little bit of sealant from the water. And then we're going to take our bearing press tool, press it back onto the shaft. Once again, I like to pull it in a little bit extra to really seat those threads so I'm not pulling on just a couple threads. And then once I've got it pulled in at least a ½ inch, start to press the bearing. I'm going to make sure that you're lined up as the bearing starts to move the bearing retaining housing into the side of the kit. Seat the bearing fully onto the lower drive shaft. Grab our 4 bolts for the bearing retainer. Give those some blue Loctite treatment. If you do not take this outside housing off, you don't have to worry about the nuts or the inside plates or anything moving around underneath here when you have the bearing out. So that's just a quick tip of kind of leave that in place unless you need to take it off. A little pre-torque on this bearing retainer assembly so we don't have as much to do with the torque. So I've looked this up in the Yeti manual already for the torque spec. You'll be able to find the torque spec on these bearing retainers and caliper mounting bolts in the Yeti manual. They are 25 Newton meter torque spec for 2019. retorqued. We will be using brand new copper washers for our installation of the brake caliper bolt. So you always want to put new washers on your brake caliper bolt when you reinstall it. One washer goes on the bolt underneath the head, right here. And the other washer will go on the other side of the banjo bolt. So you'll have one copper washer on each side of the bolt going into the brake caliper. Now that the bolt is installed in the new brake caliper, we are all set. So, YouTubers, once again, Toby Till, Rocky Mountain Snow MX. We're here for you for all of your snow bike accessories, recluse clutches, foot pegs, seats, you name it, along with all C3 product, heated handlebars, thermostats, intakes, everything you pretty much need for your snow bike. Give us a call, 720-263-7533 for any of your parts, service questions. We're here to help. Thank you very much.